Hello, everybody. I'm Miloš Krajšnik, and this is Canuck News. This is my first episode. I want to give a little intro into what my thought process is with this channel. I am thoroughly not happy with the way the news is really presented. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what news source I read. All of the news really seems a little shallow. It doesn't really give you enough information to really be able to decipher on, you know, whatever is in the article, whether it's a good or bad thing for Canada or for the world. How do you understand the information that's being served to you, and so on and so forth. And I really wanted to start off with this first article. So it's from the Globe and Mail. It's from November 6th, 2025. So yesterday. And it is BC asks Ottawa to retain North Coast tanker ban, blocking Alberta's pipeline ambitions. And the reason why I wanted to, kind of kick it off with this one, because there's been a lot of squabbles between Alberta and BC and the federal government regarding the export of oil, right? And I find it specifically laughable, hilarious, that Canada, as a resource-rich country, is actively shooting itself in the foot when it comes to manipulating its, resource wealth, right? We'd rather be building apps than, being leaders in energy or in uranium production or nuclear fusion, like whatever. It doesn't matter. Steel production, it doesn't matter, right? So this is why I think this is important, because we don't really seem to have a national policy targeted at using what we have to benefit our society the way other countries do, right? And we're going to get into it. I think you guys are going to like this story. So here's what the actual story is. Here's what's happening. So BC Premier David Eby, joined by coastal First Nations leaders, they signed a declaration calling on Ottawa to keep the federal oil tanker ban in place on the province's north coast, right? And you'll be able to see that in a second. That ban is formally known as the Oil Tanker Moratorium, and it prevents large vessels carrying crude oil from using ports in northern BC. And if it remains, it'll effectively kills Alberta's hope of building a northern export pipeline to the Pacific. Eby and the Indigenous leaders say it's about environmental safety and preventing spills, while Alberta calls it an economic chokehold. And obviously, Prime Minister Carney, he's not saying anything, right? All he says is, it depends. But what I find hilarious here is in the actual article, so get a load of this. Here's a citation. It says, part of this work is looking at the overall cumulative impacts of all shipping, Haida Nation President Gogwis Jason Alsop, said at the news conference on Wednesday. He says, with a growing number of LNG tankers already plying the waters off of Haida Gwai's 5,000 kilometers of shoreline. 5,000 kilometers of shoreline. Guys, 5,000 kilometers of shoreline. The Gogwis said his community has no stomach for oil tanker traffic. 5,000 kilometers of coastline. Do you guys understand what 5,000 kilometers of coastline is? Like, if you drove for 5,000 kilometers, like, I'm actually going to look this up right now. If you drove from Vancouver towards Ontario for 5,000 kilometers, where would you end up? You'd end up in Thunder Bay. Approximately. That's how long of a coastline these people are complaining about. Are you kidding me? Get out of here. This is what I'm saying. 5,000 kilometers of coastline. Jesus Christ. Anyways, so why this matters for Canadians, obviously outside of the ridiculous amount of coastline that they're complaining about. So according to the Canadian Energy Regulator, roughly 97% of our crude exports go to the US. Wow. And about 3.3 million barrels per day. So that makes the US, our biggest customer and basically our only customer. So what happens when the world's strongest, not only strongest economy, strongest military is your only customer, you're going to get bullied. Doesn't matter that, we speak the same language and this and that. You're going to get bullied because we're not the US, right? And we try and make a point of not being the US. And so when you only have one buyer, you can't negotiate. You have to comply, especially because of the size of the US. They have 10 times the amount of people in the country, or 9 times the amount of people. And they're just infinitely stronger, right? And so Canada's dependency is losing billions every year to the US for discounted oil prices that we're giving to the US, right? And it's just slowing our general growth, right? And Alberta is still a filthy rich country, a province. So when a single province or activist group can block a national access to tidewater, this isn't just a BC issue, it's a sovereignty issue. What are we talking about here? Where is that national strategic thinking that I was talking about at the beginning of the video? And so this is not only an economic divide that's happening, this is a political divide, because the BC premier isn't getting along with the Albertan premier, and then everybody is looking at the federal government to do something about it, and the federal government is useless. Let's be frank. We've seen what the Liberals have done during the Trudeau government. They didn't do anything. They literally ran the country into the ground. Everything became infinitely more expensive post Stephen Harper. As soon as Stephen Harper got out, everything just became more expensive. This is factual. We've dropped off on all national rankings economically. And so this just seems to be continuing with Mark Carney. And this is just another example of how divided Canada's federation has actually become. So Alberta sees Ottawa and BC. They're kind of working hand in hand. There's, Alberta's kind of giving essentially an economic lifeline to everybody. And Ottawa's just claiming neutrality. We don't want to do anything. The key here is investors are kept second guessing Canada, because you can't move your resources across your own land, right? There's too many, it's basically a border dispute, man. It's crazy. So for the Carney government sitting on the fence, this isn't neutrality, right? So every month you're sending a clear signal to investors that Canada's internal politics are a bigger problem or a bigger risk than the geology of an oil spill, right? You can't brand yourself as an investment destination if you're not giving your country access to stable trade, right? And so what's the rest of the world doing? Let's take a step back a bit. So the U.S. has obviously been, it's been all over the news what the U.S. has been trying to do. So the United States is now the largest LNG exporter on Earth, shipping roughly 11.9 billion cubic feet per day, and this was in 2024. Japan and South Korea, two of the most energy-dependent economies in Asia, have already locked in 20-year LNG contracts with American suppliers. So these deals are going to go into 2040. Meanwhile, Canada is sitting on world-class reserves with a direct Pacific coastline, and we ship nothing, almost nothing to Asia. Why? But we're going to send 97% of the stuff south, at a discounted price, and then buy finished fuels back at a premium. So we're going to send them the crude, they refine the crude, and then they sell it back to us. What the hell? This is I don't know if you guys understand this. This is like selling apples to a country wholesale right? Exporting apples, and then buying back apple juice from the country that you sold apples to. And they're obviously going to sell it at a higher price because the apple juice is refined, right? It's a finished product. Why are we making our own apple juice? Why aren't we bottling motor oil? You know what I mean? This is the problem. This is when you don't have a national strategy for the resources that you have. And so here in this next section is really going to be interesting for you guys. I wanted to compare Canada, the U.S., and Russia with a little digression into Norway as a very interesting energy country. So the United States produces around 13 million barrels of oil per day, and this is a record high in 2024. It's also the top natural gas producer, exporting LNG to allies from Europe to Asia. So in 2023, the U.S. earned over $465 billion in oil and gas export revenues. This literally single-handedly boosted its trade balance and strengthened the U.S. dollar. $465 billion in oil and gas. Russia, even under these sanctions, still has been pumping out 10 million barrels per day and has been rerouting oil and LNG to Asia through the Arctic and through the North Sea. But and so its oil and gas exports brought in $240 billion in 2023. $240 billion. And this is at like discounted prices that they were forced to sell at, right? Because there's like price caps and these things that were happening, and because they were selling their own oil at a discounted price because they're at war, and how do you kind of maintain that supply if people are kind of on the fence of like, do we support it, do we not support it? We need oil, we'll buy it but at a discount. So that's what they've been doing. So Russia's been selling at a discount. They still made $240 billion in 2023, and in 2023 the sanctions, or at least the price caps, that's when they were just coming into play. And so that's when it had a bigger impact on the actual Russian revenues on gas and oil. So today that's different. They've earned a lot more money, and they're still funding the war. And it's a high scale war, right? And it's not only energy exports, but they've, like, even during this war, they're like fifth in purchasing power parity. With all of these sanctions, like, I don't know if you guys like really understand this. Like, they're fifth in the world in purchasing power parity. Like, take that in. Like, they're higher than Germany, and they have all of these sanctions, and it's because the Russians, they know how to use their resources. That's it. They know how to use their resources, and that's the game they play. They're using their resources to the fullest of their extent, and they're building their economy in a new way. They found new trading partners and all of that. They're building new trade routes. They're thinking on how to solve a problem. Canada's only creating fucking problems. Sorry, pardon my language. Canada produces about so this is Canada now. So Canada produces about 4.6 million barrels of oil per day. Obviously, the reserves are bigger, but exports nearly all of it to one market, so the U.S. So with no independent access to global pricing, right? So we're 100%, like, if oil prices are $100 a barrel, Canada is going to be selling to the U.S. at like 80 or 85. Just so you guys like kind of conceptualize this in your head. So despite being the world's fourth largest oil producer, we rank 15th in energy export revenues. Guys, we rank 15th in energy export revenues because we sell cheap and import expensive. Let that sink in. So others are reinvesting their windfalls into national projects and actual like cool things to help propel the society. We spend ours on infighting between provinces. It's a travesty. It's honestly just a travesty. And so this is what, and here, Norway, the success story, really. So Norway is a country of 5.5 million people. Norway was a very poor European country in the mid 20th century, the 50s, 60s, 70s. It wasn't, it was a stable country, but they didn't have, they weren't a rich country until they found oil off their coast. Okay. And so disciplined energy policy, right, that they've instilled, they've built a $1.7 trillion sovereign wealth fund. $1.7 trillion sovereign wealth fund they've built. It's a country of 5.5 million people. So this is the largest sovereign wealth fund on earth. It's funded by oil and gas exports, guys. So in Norway produces around 2 million barrels a day. So that's less than half of Canada's, but it's earning so much more per capita because it owns the infrastructure, it secures long-term export deals, it channels profits into national savings, these national projects. They're trying to build up a society using the resources that they have. That's what you're supposed to be doing, right? And so that's the difference between actually having like a forward-thinking strategy and a stagnant strategy, right? Norway built generational wealth. Canada's building regulatory bottlenecks. It's a shame. It really is. But here's another opportunity that Canada's not capitalizing on. And I know, and I'm really like going into depth here because I really want to express the potential that exists with our great country, right? That we're not using at all, right? So we have an Arctic route, right? And I'm going to compare us to Russia again because Canada and Russia are really comparable countries. Because we're the two largest countries in the world by land mass, and we basically border each other in the North Sea, right? And so while Russia develops its northern sea route, so Russia's already carrying around 38 million tons of cargo, and this was in last year in 2024. Canada's sitting on a dormant trade artery, the Northwest Passage, right? And so we could literally connect Alberta's resources to Europe or even Saskatchewan, like the potash and all of that, through the Arctic, combining energy exports with sovereignty building infrastructure. But there's no national plan. There's no ports. There's no leadership. Like, when someone tells me, we have the Yukon, we have the Northwest Territories, we have none of it, it basically doesn't mean anything. Because there's nothing going on up there. We're not building anything special up there. Like the U.S. is trying to annex Greenland. Why are they trying to annex Greenland? Because then they're gonna have Alaska on this side, they're gonna have Greenland on this side, and then they're gonna put a chokehold on the Arctic. Because they're the U.S. and that's what they want. That's exactly the idea, right? And when Putin came to Alaska, what did Putin suggest? He's like, hey, why don't we build a railway from Russia into Alaska? We'll ship you resources, buddy, directly into Alaska. Yeah, that's what you do with Arctic. So if we don't use the North strategically, others will. Others are doing it strategically, and we'll be left defending our sovereignty with press releases instead of ships. Or we're just going to be eaten up by the U.S. because we're literally not doing anything. We're just not doing anything. And so, what's the big picture to take away from all of this? Canada has world-class resources. We have an awesome democratic system. We have access to the Pacific, to the Arctic, and to the Atlantic. But we're acting like a landlocked country. Like it's a travesty, to be honest. It's embarrassing. And so our allies are actually investing in infrastructure, ports and pipelines. The U.S., Norway, Germany did until they got bombed, right? Even Poland started building LNG terminals. The Japanese are building. So everybody's doing it, but we're investing in moratoriums, in consultations, and environmental stewardship is what's going to happen. No one cares. we're paralyzing our economy. Everything's more expensive in Canada. We're shooting ourselves in both knees, not even in one. Like, so we're in like a wheelchair right now, basically. For what reason? For no reason. There's no reason for us to be doing this to ourselves, but we are. Canada's doing. Norway is doing it responsibly. The whole energy thing. Norway is doing it extremely responsibly. Canada can too. There's examples. Not only does a big difference though is Canada also has uranium, and we can actually produce our own nuclear energy, and just completely have such low energy costs, and we do overall, that we can actually use that as a net advantage and start manufacturing things en masse and be just this massive G7 manufacturing hub for the West. But we're not even doing that. So quick question for you guys. What do you think? Should Canada access its coasts, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic, be protected as a matter of national interest? Or do we keep letting regional politics and bureaucratic indecision decide how much of our prosperity we're allowed to actually earn? Till next time, guys, I'm Miloš Krajčnik. Stay curious, stay informed, and God bless Canada.